What if Star Trek gave us a horror movie? That's what this maligned horror sci-fi thriller from 2009 tried to answer. It's basically Event Horizon meets The Descent, and I'm going to war with Rotten Tomatoes on this one because its score is not nearly high enough. It's day 76 of 375. Today's movie, Pandorum. Directed by Chris Alvart and starring Dennis Quaid and Ben Foster, this was a movie that blew me away in the theaters. I had such a good time watching this one because it was kind of right up my alley. I'm a Trekkie and I love horror, and we don't get the two combined very often, if at all. On top of the amazing set designs and costumes, we get a unique story with a twist that you can't see coming, and people called this derivative at the time. I would like to say that those reviewers don't know what the fuck they're talking about. I really love a horror movie that withholds what genre it's in until the very end. We talked about this a little bit on The Orphan, but I think this is an even better example of a movie that just keeps you guessing the whole way through. It starts off almost feeling like Firefly with the Reavers, until you get towards the end and start to recognize that this might be a much more realistic situation than we could have anticipated. Yeah, it's got some sci-fi trappings, and I'll even go out on a limb and say that Ben Foster falls down at least a dozen times in this movie, to the point that it almost could become a drinking game. It's not a perfect movie. I'm not saying it deserves 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, but 26%? This is worse than Leprechaun 4, the one in space. I'm sorry, but this is just a better space movie objectively. The twist is so impactful that I actually remembered it going into this movie, even though I haven't seen it since 2009. So knowing how it was going to end, there's so many things that set up and give you little hints towards that ending without giving the whole thing away wholesale. I get it. Alien set the bar really fucking high for space horror, and I'm not saying this achieves that by any means, but it's definitely no Leprechaun 4, it's no Jason X, so let's at least give this one its time in the sun, and I'll give you the 3 things that I love about Pandora. The first thing that I really love about this movie is the twist on the guy in the chair dynamic. This is something we see in movies. Spider-Man Homecoming even calls out like this dynamic as a thing for Ned. I love that this movie makes us think that that's going to be Dennis Quaid's whole thing. Why the fuck would you hire Dennis Quaid if you're just going to stick him in a chair? Except for this movie knows what kind of a movie it is and is going to do a subversion of this for us that makes the whole plot come together better. In fact, the entire mystery is improved for the fact that he's not out around the ship with Ben Foster's character learning about what happened, because he would get to that point a lot faster than he does sitting on his own. And by the time that we see the birthing of his evil ego, and I will point out, the effects in the scene are ultra disgusting just to give us that birth-like visual. I love it. This is a horror movie that knows its cinema language and is doing something really fun and twisted with the guy in the chair. Spoilers, turns out he's the villain the whole time. That's so cool that our unreliable narrator and ostensibly teammate for our main character ends up being the villain in this story in a way that allows an organic unfolding of what happened on this ship. The Elysium is also named the ship, which is another little extra we can point out because I know we're going to talk about Elysium later on in this series. That word means a little piece of heaven, a sanctuary. And I love that this movie is naming that ship in that way to give us an idea of what this could be and what it does end up being by the end of the film. But we have to go through hell to get to heaven. And I love that this movie knows that. There's a lot working underneath the hood here that wasn't appreciated when this movie first came out. The second thing that I really love about this movie, like I said at the top, are the sets and the costumes. Now, this is a make or break for a sci-fi movie. Anybody that's even worked on, let's say, a Star Trek fan film will know that this is what adds all the legitimacy to your film. A cool set, well lit, with awesome costumes, drops us into this fantastical setting. And I love that this movie goes out of its way on every step of the way. The crew's costumes aren't overly flashy. They make sense for a Blade Runner-esque future that we see a small glimpse of in a flashback. But then when we get to the villains, when we get to our monsters, our mutated humans, we find that the costumes are dilapidated versions of the clothing that was on the ship. Most of the monsters are half naked because they wouldn't have had their own clothes or even a reason to collect them as their society took over the last 900 years. And I love that that is introduced through the way they introduce weapons into their own bodies. They're dangerous things that live in the dark, just like the Descent. And much like the Descent, the creature design is very similar. You can see the inspirations here. And I love that. I love a movie that wears its inspirations on its sleeve. And this is one that's saying, hey, we're doing the Descent in space. We're not going to be tricky about that. That's what this is. The Descent is the same thing. These cave monsters are just mutated people. That's a fun thing to run with. From there, we get these amazing sets that you can see the inspiration from things like Event Horizon, things like Star Trek even. Our large nuclear reactor room that doubles as the warm, safe haven for all of the mutated creatures, potentially giving us more lore as to why they adapted the way they did. It's not just the accelerant that was in their pods, but also the fact that they live close to a nuclear reactor. The radiation runoff could be enough over 900 years to cause even extra mutations. These things that they're doing, yeah, they're sci-fi. They don't make sense in our real world, but it's enough of the trappings that you can lose yourself in it if you're willing to allow yourself to. The third and final thing that I love about this movie is the twist. It works, I swear. If you're willing to not need a movie to hold your hand through every single step of what happened, the twist is that there's no aliens, there's no space monsters other than the ones that we brought with us. We see the degradation of humanity through the Pandorum brain sickness that characters get from being in hypersleep. It even starts to affect our main character towards the end of the film, even though he has a tighter grasp on reality for having just been brought out of his pod. Dennis Quaid's character was obviously the one that was affected from the very beginning, living as a god among the last of humanity on this ship. That's cool in its own right, but then we've introduced a villain with the monsters, and that is even better. I love that we see the same thing happening across every single character. The madness is tied to all of them. It's not a random happening. This is the things that would have happened in a ship that was going to travel for hundreds of years through space. The accelerant that they put into their bodies is just enough sci-fi that if you can believe that, you can believe that we can get to another planet that's in another solar system. Like, if the trip there isn't tripping you up, then accelerant in the hyperspace shouldn't be tripping you up. And like I mentioned in the last section, we add a nuclear reactor on top of that, add lack of food and cannibalism on top of that. Who knows what kinds of things could have happened in the sci-fi background, because this movie divorces us from a scientist character to walk us through all this and hold our hand. It instead says, no, this is a fucking horror movie, dude. You don't need to know why Jason Voorhees can't be killed. You just need to know that he can. I appreciate that in a movie like this, especially one that's not overstaying its welcome. It's a tight 90 minutes. A 2-hour version would have been too talky. I want that out of a Sunshine. And honestly, I think the finale of this movie is better than the finale of Sunshine. Hot take, I love Sunshine, don't get me wrong, but that finale has its own weird monster twist that just doesn't work as clean as the loss of humanity and our captain. But what do you think? Does this movie deserve its 26%, or are you in my boat and you believe it is a much better film than Rotten Tomatoes makes it out to me? We're gonna keep the gore going with our next movie. We're talking about Zombieland tomorrow, and as always, I'll see you tomorrow. We're gonna keep things gory and keep the body count high by talking about Zombieland next, and as always, I'll see you tomorrow.